The sound of laughter drifted through the kitchen window as Natasha finished washing the last of the dishes from the family barbecue. Her hands moved mechanically, scrubbing the grease from plates while her mind wandered to the pile of bills waiting on her desk at home. 8 years of marriage and she still felt like an outsider at these gatherings. She dried her hands on the dish rag and stepped toward the back door, ready to rejoin the party in the yard. That's when she heard Alexander's voice rise above the chatter, clear and sharp in the evening air. "Well folks, I guess this calls for a toast." Her husband's voice carried that familiar tone he used when he was about to say something he thought was clever. Natasha paused, her hand on the door handle. "To what?" called out his brother Marcus from across the yard. "To freedom." Alexander laughed, raising his beer bottle high. "The divorce papers were signed yesterday. I'm finally free from 8 years of dead weight." The words hit Natasha like a physical blow. She pressed her face closer to the screen door, her heart hammering against her ribs. This couldn't be happening. They hadn't even filed the papers yet. They'd barely discussed it beyond their last fight 3 weeks ago. "About time, son," came his father's gruff voice. "That woman never fit with our family anyway." "I'll drink to that," Alexander's mother chimed in, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "You deserve so much better." Natasha watched through the screen as the entire family raised their drinks. Her sister-in-law Beth, whose children Natasha had practically raised for the past 5 years. Her brother-in-law Marcus, whose DUI legal fees she'd helped pay when money was tight. Alexander's parents, whom she'd cared for through illness and recovery, giving up countless weekends and holidays. And there, sitting right next to Alexander on the picnic bench, was Rebecca from his office. The woman he'd sworn was just a friend, whenever Natasha brought up her concerns. Rebecca's manicured hand rested on Alexander's thigh as she smiled up at him with obvious adoration. "Here's to Rebecca," Alexander continued, his arms sliding around the blonde woman's shoulders. "For showing me what real love looks like." The family erupted in cheers and applause. Someone started a chant of "Rebecca, Rebecca," as if she were some kind of conquering hero. Natasha's legs gave out, and she sank onto the kitchen stool behind her. The ceramic mug in her hand, the one that read "World's Best Wife," that Alexander had given her last Christmas, slipped from her fingers and shattered on the tile floor. 8 years. 8 years of putting his family first, of giving up her career in marketing to move to this small town where his parents lived. 8 years of cooking for family gatherings, organizing birthday parties, sending Christmas cards, and pretending she didn't notice how they whispered about her behind her back. "Did you hear that crash?" Beth's voice drifted through the door. "Probably Natasha dropping something again," Alexander replied with a laugh. "Good thing I won't have to deal with that much longer." More laughter. Even Rebecca giggled, a high-pitched sound that made Natasha's skin crawl. She stared at the broken pieces of the mug scattered across the floor, each shard reflecting the porch light like tiny accusations. The irony wasn't lost on her. World's Best Wife shattered just like everything else. Through the screen door she could see Alexander's face clearly now. He looked relaxed, happy even as he accepted congratulations from his family. This wasn't a man struggling with a difficult decision. This was a man celebrating his victory. "So when's the wedding?" Marcus called out, gesturing toward Rebecca. "Soon as the ink's dry on the divorce papers," Alexander replied, squeezing Rebecca closer. "No point in waiting around." Rebecca beamed and held up her left hand, showing off a diamond ring that caught the light from the tiki torches. The family oohed and awed over it, passing her hand around to admire the stone. Natasha's own wedding ring suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She looked down at the simple gold band she'd worn faithfully for 8 years. How long had he been planning this? How long had they all known? "That ring's bigger than the one he gave Natasha," she heard his mother whisper loudly. "Well, Rebecca deserves the best," Alexander replied. "She's been so patient, waiting for me to work up the courage to end things." Patient. Waiting. The words confirmed what Natasha's gut had been telling her for months. This wasn't some sudden decision after their recent fights. This had been planned, calculated, orchestrated while she'd been running around trying to save a marriage that was already dead and buried in everyone's mind but hers. She thought about the conversation they'd had just last week, when she'd begged him to try counseling. He'd looked her straight in the eye and said maybe they should work on things, that he still loved her, that they just needed to communicate better. All lies. All of it. The back door opened and Beth poked her head in. "Natasha? You okay in here? We heard something break." Natasha looked up at her sister-in-law, this woman whose children called her Aunt Tasha, whose homework she'd helped with countless nights, whose scraped knees she'd bandaged and whose tears she'd dried. Beth's expression held no warmth, no concern, just mild annoyance at the interruption. "I'm fine," Natasha managed to say, her voice surprisingly steady. "Just dropped a mug." "Well, clean it up, would you? Mom doesn't want anyone stepping on glass." Beth turned to go, then paused. "Oh, and Alexander wants you to stay inside for a bit. We're having some family discussions." Family discussions? About her? While she cleaned up their mess. Beth disappeared back outside and Natasha heard the door latch click. She was officially shut out, relegated to kitchen duty while they planned her husband's new life. She knelt down and began picking up the ceramic pieces, each sharp edge a reminder of how completely she'd been played. As she worked, fragments of memory began falling into place like puzzle pieces she'd been too trusting to see. The way Rebecca had started showing up at company events 6 months ago, always managing to sit near Alexander. The way his family had grown increasingly cold toward her over the past year, making comments about how she was holding Alexander back, or how he deserved someone who understood him better. The late-night phone calls he'd explained away as work emergencies. The weekend business trips that had become more frequent. The way he'd started picking fights with her over small things, as if he were trying to justify something to himself. They'd all been in on it. His entire family had watched her sacrifice her career, her friendships, her own family relationships to become the perfect wife and daughter-in-law, all while knowing she was being replaced. Outside, the party continued. Someone had turned on music, and she could hear the clink of beer bottles and the sizzle of meat on the grill. Her husband was out there celebrating the end of their marriage like it was the 4th of July, surrounded by people who were supposed to be her family too. Natasha dropped the ceramic shards into the trash and stood up, her decision crystallizing like ice in her chest. If Alexander wanted to play games, if he wanted to humiliate her and treat their marriage like a joke, then he was about to learn what real games looked like. She'd given up everything for this family. Her career, her independence, her self-respect. She'd bent over backward to earn their acceptance, to prove she was worthy of their son and brother. But she was done begging for scraps of affection from people who'd never valued her in the first place. She was done being the good wife who cleaned up their messes and asked for nothing in return. Alexander thought he was so clever, planning his exit strategy while keeping her in the dark. He thought he could discard her like an old appliance and move on to his shiny new model without consequences. He was wrong. Natasha walked to the kitchen sink and stared at her reflection in the dark window. The woman looking back at her had been broken down, made small, taught to apologize for existing. But underneath the hurt and humiliation, something else was stirring to life. Rage. Pure, clean rage that burned away the fog of confusion and self-doubt she'd been living in. She slipped out the front door while the party continued in the backyard, walking to her car with quiet, measured steps. As she drove away from the house that had never felt like home, she could still hear the laughter carrying on the night air. Let them laugh. Let them celebrate. Let Alexander bask in his moment of triumph. Because Natasha Johnson was about to remind them all that she wasn't some helpless victim they could dispose of quietly. She was a woman who'd built a successful career before she'd sacrificed it all for love. She was smart, resourceful, and now she was motivated by something more powerful than heartbreak. She was motivated by justice. And Alexander had no idea what was coming for him. Natasha sat in her car in the parking lot of the 24-hour diner on Route 9, staring at her phone screen. The time read 11:47 p.m., but sleep was the furthest thing from her mind. Her hands shook slightly as she scrolled through her contacts, looking for a number she hadn't called in 3 years. Finally, she found it. Patricia Williams, her former boss at Henderson Marketing in Chicago. The woman who'd called her the best account manager they'd ever had, right up until the day Natasha had turned in her resignation letter. She pressed call before she could lose her nerve. Natasha. Patricia's voice was groggy but immediately alert. My God, what time is it? Are you okay? I'm sorry for calling so late, Natasha said, her voice cracking slightly. I know it's been years, but I didn't know who else to call. Honey, what's wrong? You sound terrible. The concern in Patricia's voice nearly broke her composure. It had been so long since someone had spoken to her with genuine care that she'd almost forgotten what it felt like. My marriage is over, she said simply. And I need to remember who I used to be. There was a pause, then Patricia's voice came back stronger. Where are you? Are you safe? I'm safe. I'm sitting in a parking lot trying to figure out how I got here. Natasha laughed bitterly. Do you remember when I left the company? What I told you? Of course I remember. You said Alexander's family needed you. His parents were getting older and you wanted to be there to help. You were so excited about starting fresh in a small town, about building a life together. The memory felt like looking at someone else's life. I was an idiot. You were in love, Patricia corrected gently. There's a difference. Natasha closed her eyes, letting herself remember. She'd been 26 then, riding high on her success at Henderson Marketing. She'd just landed the Paramount Industries account, the biggest client acquisition in the company's history. Her salary had jumped to 6 figures, and she'd been in line for a promotion to senior account manager. Then she'd met Alexander at her college roommate's wedding. He'd been charming, attentive, different from the competitive men she usually dated in the city. He told her about his small hometown, about his aging parents who needed help, about his dream of taking over his father's hardware store and turning it into something bigger. I thought I was building something, she said into the phone. I thought we were partners. What happened, Natasha? The story spilled out of her then, 3 years of suppressed frustration pouring out in a torrent. How she'd moved to Millbrook, population 3,200, and discovered that Alexander's dream consisted mostly of complaining about his father's old-fashioned ways while doing nothing to actually change them. How his parents, Robert and Eleanor, had greeted her arrival with polite distance that had gradually shifted to outright coldness. How every suggestion she'd made for improving the hardware store had been dismissed as city nonsense. How she'd eventually stopped trying and had focused instead on making herself useful in other ways. I became their unpaid caretaker, she told Patricia. When Robert had his heart attack 2 years ago, I was the one who organized his care schedule, drove him to appointments, made sure he took his medications. When Eleanor broke her hip last year, I moved in with them for 6 weeks. What was Alexander doing during all this? Working, supposedly. Always working late, always too busy to help with his own parents. The irony wasn't lost on her now. I realize now he was probably with Rebecca. She told Patricia about Beth's children, how she'd become their de facto guardian whenever Beth needed a babysitter, which was constantly. About the family gatherings where she'd do all the cooking and cleaning while the rest of them sat around complaining about everything from the weather to the government. I kept thinking if I just tried harder, if I just proved how much I cared about the family, they'd accept me, she said. I gave up everything. My career, my friends, my apartment in Chicago. I even gave up my relationship with my own parents because Alexander said they were too demanding of my time. Oh, honey. The worst part is I was good at what I did. Remember the Morrison campaign? The way we turned their brand around in 6 months. You were brilliant, Patricia said firmly. You had instincts that couldn't be taught. Clients trusted you because you delivered results. Natasha had loved that job. The thrill of solving complex marketing puzzles, the satisfaction of watching a campaign come together, the rush of landing a new client. She'd been building something real, something that was hers. I had options then, she said. I had my own money, my own place, my own life. I threw it all away for a man who was planning to dump me while I was washing his family's dishes. It's not too late, you know, Patricia said quietly. It's never too late to start over. I'm 34 years old with a 3-year gap in my resume and no references except my lying husband. You're 34 years old with a decade of experience, a proven track record, and a friend who happens to run her own agency now. There was a smile in Patricia's voice. I left Henderson 2 years ago. Started my own firm. I could use someone with your skills. Natasha felt something stir in her chest, something she hadn't felt in years. Oh, are you serious? Dead serious. The market's changed since you left, but smart is smart. Talent is talent. And you, Natasha Johnson, have both in spades. They talked for another hour, Patricia filling her in on industry changes, new technologies, shifts in client expectations. With each detail, Natasha felt more of herself coming back online, like a computer rebooting after a long shutdown. There's something else, she said finally. Alexander thinks he's been clever about our finances. He's been hiding money, moving assets around. He probably thinks I'm too stupid to notice. Are you? Not even close. For the first time in hours, Natasha smiled. He forgets I managed million-dollar advertising budgets. I know how to track money. Good girl. After they hung up, Natasha sat in the quiet car and let herself really think about the past 3 years. Not through the lens of a heartbroken wife, but through the eyes of the sharp businesswoman she used to be. Alexander had been managing their finances, claiming it was easier for him to handle everything through his business accounts. She trusted him, grateful not to deal with the mundane details of bills and investments. But she'd still received copies of statements, still saw the transfers and deposits. At the time, she'd assumed they were normal business transactions. Now she realized they'd been anything but normal. Money had been moving out of their joint accounts and into accounts she didn't have access to. Their savings account, which should have grown over the years, had remained mysteriously flat despite both of them working. And the credit card bills she'd occasionally seen had charges she didn't recognize, expensive dinners at restaurants they'd never been to together, jewelry purchases she'd never received, weekend trips she hadn't taken. He'd been funding his relationship with Rebecca with their money. With her money. The rage that had sustained her through the drive from the house flared up again, but this time it was cold and calculating. This wasn't just about a cheating husband anymore. This was about theft, fraud, financial abuse. And unlike heartbreak, those things could be prosecuted. Natasha started her car and drove toward home, her mind already working through the steps she'd need to take. First, she'd need copies of everything: bank statements, credit card bills, business records. Then she'd need a lawyer, someone who specialized in complex divorce cases. But most importantly, she needed to be smart about this. Alexander thought he was dealing with the same passive, accommodating woman who'd spent the last 3 years trying to earn his family's approval. He expected her to cry, to beg, to make this easy for him. He was about to discover just how wrong he was. As she pulled into their driveway, she could see the light on in Alexander's home office. Probably up late planning his new life with Rebecca, or maybe talking to her on the phone while his soon-to-be ex-wife had been out crying into her coffee. She'd let him think he was winning for now. Let him get comfortable, careless. Let him believe she was broken and defeated. Because the woman who'd walked out of that barbecue wasn't the same woman who was walking back in. That woman had been Natasha the wife, Natasha the caretaker, Natasha the sacrificer. This woman was Natasha the strategist. And she was about to remind everyone exactly what she was capable of when she set her mind to something. The old Natasha had given up everything for Alexander's family. The new Natasha was going to take it all back with interest. 3 days after the barbecue, Natasha woke up before dawn and lay perfectly still in bed, listening to Alexander's breathing beside her. He slept deeply, without guilt or worry, the sleep of a man who believed he held all the cards. She'd been playing the part of the unknowing wife for 72 hours now, and it was eating her alive. But every fake smile, every "how was your day, honey?" was buying her time to plan her next moves. Alexander stirred beside her, then reached for his phone on the nightstand. The blue light illuminated his face as he checked his messages, and she watched through barely opened eyes as his expression softened into a smile. His fingers moved quickly across the screen, typing what she knew must be good morning messages to Rebecca. Right there. Right next to his wife of 8 years, he was texting another woman. "Morning," she said softly, and he nearly dropped the phone. "Oh hey." He shoved the phone under his pillow. "You're up early. Couldn't sleep." She stretched and sat up, playing the role perfectly. "Want me to make coffee?" "Sure, that would be great." He was already reaching for the phone again. "I need to check some work emails before I get in the shower." "Work emails. Right." Natasha padded to the kitchen and started the coffee maker, her mind spinning. In the old days before she'd moved to Millbrook and lost herself, she'd been good at reading people. It had been part of what made her successful in marketing. She could sense when a client was wavering, when a competitor was making moves, when her boss was unhappy with a campaign. Those instincts were coming back now, and they were screaming. She thought back to the past 6 months, looking for clues she'd missed or dismissed. The way Alexander had started working late 3 nights a week. The new cologne he'd started wearing. The sudden interest in updating his wardrobe. The way he'd begun picking fights with her over increasingly petty things. "You never want to do anything fun anymore," he'd complained last month when she'd suggested staying in instead of going to another family gathering. "You've gotten so boring, Natasha." At the time, his words had stung. She'd wondered if he was right, if she'd somehow lost her spark. Now she realized he'd been trying to justify what he was already doing. The coffee maker beeped, and she poured 2 cups, adding cream to hers and leaving his black the way he liked it. As she climbed the stairs back to their bedroom, she could hear him talking quietly on the phone. "Can't wait to see you either," he was saying. "Just a few more weeks and this will all be over." She paused outside the bedroom door, cup in each hand, listening. "I know it's hard, baby, but we have to be careful. Once the divorce is final, we can stop sneaking around." "Baby." He called Rebecca baby. "You're worth waiting for," he continued, his voice soft with affection. "I love you too." The words hit her like physical blows. "I love you too." When was the last time he'd said those words to her? Months? Years? She pushed open the bedroom door and Alexander quickly ended the call. "Work emergency?" she asked, handing him his coffee. Yeah, big order came in. Had to call the supplier. He took the cup without meeting her eyes. Thanks for the coffee. Of course. She sat on the edge of the bed, studying his face. You seem stressed lately. Is everything okay at the store? For just a moment, something flickered across his expression. Guilt? Discomfort? Then his face went blank again. Everything's fine. Just busy season, you know how it is. She knew how it was all right. She knew exactly how it was. I was thinking, she said carefully, maybe we should plan a trip somewhere. Just the two of us. We haven't had a real vacation in years. Alexander's face went tight. I can't leave the store right now. Too much going on. Even for a weekend? We could drive up to that cabin in Vermont we used to talk about. I said I can't, Natasha. His voice was sharp now, annoyed. Why can't you understand that I have responsibilities? There it was. The tone she'd been hearing more and more lately. Like she was a burden, an obstacle to his happiness. I was just trying to what? Add more pressure to my life. He stood up abruptly, coffee sloshing in his cup. I have enough stress without you nagging me about vacations. Nagging. That was a new word in his vocabulary. One she suspected he'd picked up from someone else. I'm not nagging, she said quietly. I'm trying to spend time with my husband. Well, maybe try understanding that your husband has more important things to deal with right now than your need for constant attention. The cruelty in his voice was breathtaking. This was the man she'd rearranged her entire life for, and he was speaking to her like she was a stranger he disliked. But instead of crying or getting angry, she found herself observing him with clinical detachment. This was a performance, she realized. He was picking a fight on purpose, trying to make her the bad guy so he could justify what he was doing. You're right, she said, surprising him. I'm sorry. I know you're under a lot of pressure. He blinked, clearly expecting her to fight back. Well, good. I'll try to be more understanding. She smiled at him, and his confusion deepened. I love you, Alexander. The words nearly choked her, but she forced them out. Because she needed to see his reaction. He flinched. Actually flinched like she'd slapped him. Yeah. Love you too, he mumbled, then practically fled to the bathroom. As soon as she heard the shower start, Natasha moved quickly. His phone was still under his pillow, and while she couldn't get past his lock screen, she could see the message notifications that had been piling up. 3 messages from R in the past hour. 1 from Dad, and 2 from Beth. But it was the R messages that made her stomach clench. The preview text showed just enough to confirm what she already knew. R, can't wait for tonight. I have a surprise for you. R, your wife has no idea, does she? Poor thing. R, after last night, I can't imagine how you stayed married to. The rest was cut off, but Natasha had seen enough. She put the phone back exactly where she'd found it and walked downstairs on shaky legs. In the kitchen, she gripped the counter and forced herself to breathe. Poor thing. Rebecca pitied her. They were laughing about her, sharing jokes about how clueless she was. The shower was still running upstairs. Alexander would be in there for at least 10 more minutes. He'd always been vain about his appearance, and lately he'd been taking even longer to get ready. She walked to his home office and tried the door. Locked, which was new. He'd never locked his office door before, not in 8 years of marriage. Another red flag she'd somehow missed. But she knew where he kept the spare key in the kitchen junk drawer, tucked behind the battery tester. She'd seen him use it last month when he'd locked himself out by accident. The key turned easily in the lock and she slipped inside. Alexander's office was neat, organized, just like everything else about him. But as she looked around with new eyes, she began to notice things that didn't belong. A bottle of expensive whiskey on the shelf that she'd never seen before. A framed photo of the company softball team, with Rebecca prominently featured in the front row. She'd been to that softball game. She'd watched from the stands while Alexander played, had cheered when his team won. She'd even taken pictures. But somehow she wasn't in the framed photo on his desk. His computer was password protected, but his filing cabinet wasn't. She pulled open the top drawer and found exactly what she was looking for. Bank statements, credit card bills, investment records. Her hands moved quickly, photographing each page with her phone. She'd go through them later when she had time to really analyze the numbers. But even at a glance, she could see transfers and charges that made no sense. A $2,000 charge at Tiffany & Company. She'd never received any jewelry from Tiffany. Multiple charges at Romano's, the upscale restaurant across town. She'd been asking Alexander to take her there for their anniversary for 3 years. He'd always said it was too expensive. Hotel charges. Lots of hotel charges, all local. Why would he need hotel rooms in his own town unless he was meeting someone there? The shower had stopped running upstairs. She quickly put everything back where she'd found it and slipped out of the office, locking the door behind her. By the time Alexander came downstairs, freshly showered and dressed in clothes that were definitely nicer than what he usually wore to work, she was back in the kitchen making breakfast. "Smells good," he said, but his tone was distracted. He was checking his phone again. "Just scrambled eggs and toast." She plated his food and set it in front of him. "What time will you be home tonight?" "Late. We're doing inventory at the store." Another lie. She could see it in his face, in the way he wouldn't meet her eyes. "I'll keep dinner warm for you," she said. He nodded absently, already focused on his phone again. "Thanks." As she watched him eat the breakfast she'd made while texting another woman, Natasha felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. This wasn't just an affair. This was systematic deception, financial fraud, and emotional abuse, all wrapped up in one neat package. Alexander thought he was so clever. He thought she was the same trusting wife who'd given up her career and moved to his hometown without question. He thought she was too naive, too dependent on him to fight back. He was wrong on all counts. After he left for work, she sat at the kitchen table with her phone and scrolled through the photos she'd taken of the financial documents. Even without her laptop and spreadsheet software, she could see the patterns. Money flowing out of their joint accounts. Mysterious deposits that didn't match his stated income from the hardware store. Credit card charges that painted a picture of a double life. She'd built her career on reading data, on finding the story hidden in numbers and trends. And this story was crystal clear. Alexander wasn't just cheating on her. He was stealing from her. And based on the timeline of the transactions, he'd been planning his exit strategy for at least a year. The old Natasha would have confronted him directly, would have cried and begged for explanations. The old Natasha would have tried to fight for a marriage that was already over. But the old Natasha was gone. The woman sitting at this kitchen table was someone harder, smarter, more dangerous. Someone who understood that the best revenge wasn't emotional, it was strategic. And Alexander had just handed her all the ammunition she needed. 2 weeks of playing the perfect wife had nearly driven Natasha to madness, but it had also given her something invaluable: information. She'd documented Alexander's lies, photographed financial records, and built a timeline of his deception that painted a picture so clear it could have been a PowerPoint presentation. Now, sitting in the parking lot of Millbrook Community Bank with a manila folder full of evidence, she was about to take the next step. "Mrs. Johnson?" The loan officer, a middle-aged woman named Carol Peterson, looked confused as she flipped through the account statements Natasha had placed on her desk. "I'm not sure I understand what you're asking." "I'm asking about the joint accounts my husband and I opened when I moved here 3 years ago," Natasha said calmly. "Specifically, I'd like to know about the transfers that have been made without my knowledge or consent." Carol's expression grew uncomfortable. "Well, both account holders have equal access to joint accounts. If Mr. Johnson made transfers, he was legally entitled to do so. Even if he forged my signature on the transfer authorizations?" That got Carol's attention. "I'm sorry?" Natasha opened her folder and pulled out photocopies of several transfer forms. "These are my signatures," she said, pointing to her name on their original account opening documents. "And these are my signatures on the transfer authorizations from the past year." Carol leaned forward, studying the papers. Even to the untrained eye, the difference was obvious. The forged signatures were close, but not perfect. Too much pressure on the N in Natasha, not enough curve on the J in Johnson. "Oh my," Carol whispered. "I'd like to know where the money went," Natasha continued. "Specifically, I'd like account numbers, transfer dates, and amounts. All of it." "Mrs. Johnson, this could be a criminal matter. I think you need to speak with the police." "I will. But first, I need documentation of exactly what was stolen and when. Can you help me or not?" Carol hesitated, then reached for her computer. "Let me pull up your account history." What Natasha learned in the next hour made her sick to her stomach. Over the course of 18 months, Alexander had systematically drained their savings account, transferring money in small amounts that wouldn't trigger automatic alerts. $500 here, $800 there, never more than $1,000 at a time. But it added up. In total, he'd stolen nearly $40,000 from their joint accounts. "The receiving account," Carol said quietly, "it's listed under Johnson Family Trust. Is that familiar?" "No," Natasha said grimly. "There is no Johnson Family Trust. Not one that I know about, anyway." More forgery. Alexander had created a fake trust, probably with himself and Rebecca as beneficiaries, and had been using it to hide marital assets. Mrs. Johnson, I have to ask, are you in a safe situation? Because if your husband has been forging your signature and moving money without your consent, that's not just theft. It's financial abuse. The words hung in the air between them. Financial abuse. Natasha had heard the term before, but she'd never applied it to her own life. Abuse was something that happened to other women, women who were obviously victimized. Not successful, educated women who'd simply trusted their husbands. I'm safe, she said finally. He doesn't know that I know. Yet. Carol printed out everything: account histories, transfer records, copies of the forged signatures. The evidence filled a thick manila envelope that felt like it weighed 100 pounds. What will you do now? Carol asked. What I should have done 3 years ago, Natasha replied. Take control of my own life. Her next stop was the law office of Bennett and Associates, the only divorce attorneys in town. She called ahead and requested a consultation with Sarah Bennett, the senior partner. Sarah Bennett was not what Natasha had expected. Instead of the matronly, conservative lawyer she'd imagined, Sarah was a sharp-eyed woman in her early 40s who radiated competence and barely contained energy. So, Sarah said, settling behind her desk with a cup of coffee that smelled strong enough to wake the dead, your husband is cheating on you, stealing from you, and planning to divorce you without your knowledge. Did I get that right? That's the short version, yes. And you've been documenting everything for 2 weeks while pretending you don't know what's happening. Yes. Sarah's smile was predatory. I like you already. Walk me through it from the beginning. Natasha laid out the whole story, from the barbecue disaster to her discoveries about the forged signatures and hidden accounts. Sarah took notes, occasionally asking pointed questions that showed she was already thinking 3 steps ahead. The Johnson Family Trust, Sarah said, tapping her pen against her notepad. I can trace that for you, find out exactly who the beneficiaries are and where the money went. My guess is your husband set it up with Rebecca as a co-trustee. Can we get the money back? Oh honey, we can do better than that. Sarah's grin was sharp as a blade. Your husband just handed us a fraud case on a silver platter. Forged signatures, hidden assets, financial deception. This isn't just a divorce anymore. This is a criminal matter. What does that mean for me? It means instead of fighting over half the marital assets, we're going to argue that everything belongs to you as compensation for his theft. It means he's going to be too busy defending himself against fraud charges to play games with the divorce proceedings. And it means, Sarah leaned back in her chair looking satisfied, that Rebecca is about to discover what it's like to be involved with a man who's facing serious jail time. The thought sent a thrill through Natasha that was probably unhealthy but felt incredible. There's something else, she said. His family knew. About the affair, about everything. They've been treating me like garbage for months while knowing he was planning to leave me. Emotional distress, Sarah nodded. We can work with that too. How much time do you think we have before he realizes you know? Hard to say. He's getting careless, but he still thinks I'm completely clueless. Good. Here's what we're going to do. Sarah pulled out a legal pad and started writing. First, we're going to freeze all the joint accounts immediately. He won't be able to move another penny without your consent. Second, we're going to file an emergency motion to preserve all marital assets, including whatever's in this fake trust account. Can we do that? Honey, with this evidence we can do whatever we want. Third, we're going to start building a case that's so airtight your husband won't know what hit him. They spent the next 2 hours going through strategy. Sarah explained how divorce proceedings worked in cases involving fraud, how long the process would likely take, and what Natasha could expect in terms of outcomes. I have to ask, Sarah said as they wrapped up, are you sure you want to go this route? Once we file these papers, there's no going back. Your husband will know exactly what you've discovered, and he's not going to be happy about it. Natasha thought about the past 3 years. The sacrifices, the loneliness, the constant feeling that she wasn't good enough for his family. The way he'd looked at her with barely concealed irritation while texting Rebecca. The sound of his family laughing as he toasted their divorce. I'm sure, she said. Any chance you want to try to work things out? Marriage counseling, reconciliation. Would you want to reconcile with someone who stole $40,000 from you while planning to leave you for another woman? Sarah's smile was answer enough. That evening, Natasha sat at her kitchen table with her laptop, creating spreadsheets that detailed every financial transaction, every lie, every piece of evidence she'd gathered. It felt good to be using her analytical skills again, to be building something concrete and purposeful. Alexander came home late as usual, smelling like perfume that wasn't hers. How was inventory? She asked pleasantly. Long, boring. You know how it is. He grabbed a beer from the refrigerator and headed toward his office. I've got some paperwork to catch up on. More lies. But that was fine. Let him think he was still in control. Alexander? She called out just as he reached the hallway. Yeah. I love you. He froze, and for a moment she saw something that might have been panic cross his face. Then he forced a smile. Love you too, babe. Babe. Rebecca was baby, she was babe. Even his pet names were recycled. As soon as his office door closed, she went back to her laptop. Sarah had given her homework: document everything, create a timeline, prepare for war. And Natasha was very good at homework. Her phone buzzed with a text from Patricia in Chicago. How are you holding up? Need anything? She typed back, getting stronger every day. Starting to remember who I am. Good. That bastard has no idea what's coming for him, does he? Natasha looked toward Alexander's office, where she could hear him talking quietly on the phone, probably to Rebecca. Not a clue, she replied. And that was exactly how she wanted it. Tomorrow, Sarah would file the papers that would freeze their accounts and preserve their assets. Tomorrow, Alexander would discover that his wife wasn't the passive victim he'd thought she was. Tomorrow the real game would begin. But tonight, she was content to let him think he was winning while she planned his destruction. The call came at 9:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. Natasha was in the grocery store comparing prices on coffee brands when her phone rang. Sarah Bennett's name flashed on the screen. It's done, Sarah said without preamble. The accounts are frozen, the asset preservation order is filed, and your husband should be getting served with papers within the hour. Natasha's heart started hammering. What happens now? Now we wait for him to react. But Natasha? Be prepared. Men like Alexander don't handle being outmaneuvered very well. I'll be careful. I mean it. When he realizes what you've done, when he figures out that you've been 10 steps ahead of him this whole time, he's going to be furious. Make sure you're somewhere safe when it hits. Natasha abandoned her shopping cart and drove home, her hands shaking slightly on the steering wheel. After weeks of playing the long game, the moment of truth was finally here. She was sitting at the kitchen table trying to focus on a cup of tea, when she heard Alexander's truck screech into the driveway. Car doors slammed more than one. He wasn't alone. The front door burst open with enough force to rattle the windows. Natasha. Alexander's voice was raw with rage. Natasha, get out here right now. She took a deep breath, stood up, and walked calmly to the living room. Alexander was there, still in his work clothes, his face red with fury. Behind him stood his father Robert, his mother Eleanor, and his sister Beth, all wearing expressions of barely contained anger. The whole family. How touching. What's wrong? She asked, keeping her voice level and innocent. Alexander held up a thick stack of legal papers, shaking them in her face. What's wrong? What's wrong? You froze our bank accounts. You filed for divorce without even talking to me. Oh, she said mildly. You got the papers. Oh. His voice cracked with incredulity. Oh, that's all you have to say. Eleanor stepped forward, her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. How dare you embarrass this family like this? Going behind Alexander's back, causing a scene. Causing a scene? Natasha turned to her mother-in-law with genuine curiosity. Is that what we're calling it when someone discovers their husband has been stealing from them? Stealing? Robert's voice was gruff with dismissal. That's ridiculous. Alexander would never. Steal $40,000 from our joint accounts by forging my signature? Natasha reached into her purse and pulled out copies of the bank documents. Because I have the evidence right here. She laid the papers on the coffee table like she was dealing cards. The forged signatures were unmistakable when placed side by side with legitimate ones. The room went very quiet. That's not. Alexander started, then stopped. His face had gone pale. Would you like to explain where that money went, honey? Natasha asked sweetly. Because I have a pretty good idea. Beth found her voice first. Even if that's true, you had no right to air our family's business with lawyers and judges. You should have come to us first. Come to you? Natasha laughed, a sound with no humor in it. Come to the people who knew about Rebecca all along? The people who toasted our divorce at a barbecue while I was washing your dishes? The silence that followed was deafening. Eleanor's face flushed red. You were listening? I was cleaning up your mess like always. But yes, I heard every word. Every toast, every congratulation, every joke about how Alexander was finally getting rid of his dead weight. Alexander's shoulders sagged. For the first time since he'd stormed in, he looked defeated rather than angry. Natasha, I can explain. Can you? Can you explain why you've been having an affair for over a year while I took care of your parents? Can you explain why you stole money from our joint accounts to pay for dates with your girlfriend? Can you explain why your entire family knew about it and said nothing? It wasn't supposed to happen like this, he said weakly. I was going to tell you. When? After the wedding? After you'd moved all our assets into accounts I couldn't access? After you'd had your celebration barbecue? Robert stepped forward, his face hard. Now you listen here, young lady. I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but… Game? Natasha's voice rose for the first time. You think this is a game? I gave up my career for your son. I moved away from my family and friends to take care of you when you were sick. I raised Beth's children when she was too busy partying. I cooked your meals and cleaned your house and swallowed my pride every time you made it clear I wasn't good enough for your precious boy. She was standing now, 3 years of suppressed anger finally finding its voice. I did everything I could to earn your acceptance, to prove I was worthy of being part of this family. And all along you knew. You knew he was cheating on me and you cheered him on. We never meant for you to get hurt, Beth said, but her voice lacked conviction. Didn't you? Natasha looked around the room at their guilty faces. Because it sure seemed like you were enjoying yourselves at that barbecue. It sure seemed like you were happy to see me humiliated. Eleanor lifted her chin defiantly. Maybe we were. Maybe we were tired of watching our son settle for someone who clearly wasn't right for him. The words hit like a slap, but Natasha didn't flinch. She'd been expecting this. Someone who wasn't right for him, she repeated slowly. You mean someone who expected him to be faithful? Someone who expected honesty in marriage? Someone who expected him to give up his whole life for her career? Eleanor shot back. Someone who never really fit in here, no matter how hard she tried. You're right, Natasha said, and her calm agreement seemed to surprise them. I never fit in here. I never understood how a family could watch someone sacrifice everything for them and then laugh when she got betrayed. I never understood how people could smile to someone's face while stabbing them in the back. She looked directly at Alexander. But mostly, I never understood how the man I loved could be so weak, so cowardly, that he'd let his family convince him to throw away 8 years of marriage instead of just being honest about what he wanted. Alexander's face crumpled. Natasha, please. It doesn't have to be like this. We can work something out, we can… Work something out? She picked up the divorce papers from the coffee table. You mean like the something you worked out with Rebecca? The something where you steal my money to pay for your affair while planning to divorce me without my knowledge? I never meant to hurt you. But you did. You hurt me in ways I didn't even know were possible. And worse than that, you made me complicit in my own humiliation by keeping me in the dark while everyone else knew the truth. She looked around the room one more time, taking in the faces of people she'd considered family for 3 years. I want all of you to know something, she said quietly. I'm not the same woman who moved to this town and tried so hard to please you. That woman is gone. The woman standing here now knows exactly what she's worth, and she's not going to settle for scraps of affection from people who never valued her anyway. Robert stepped forward, his face threatening. You think you can just waltz in here and destroy our family? You think we're going to let you get away with this? Let me? Natasha smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. You don't have a choice in the matter. Your son committed fraud. He forged my signature and stole marital assets. That's not a family matter, that's a criminal matter. You wouldn't? Beth breathed. I already have. The district attorney's office received copies of all the evidence this morning. Alexander's face went white. You called the police? I called the authorities responsible for prosecuting financial crimes. What happens next depends on them. The room erupted in angry voices, all talking at once. Accusations, threats, demands that she be reasonable and think about the family. But Natasha just stood there watching them fall apart, feeling nothing but cold satisfaction. Finally, Alexander raised his voice above the chaos. Enough. The room fell silent. He looked at Natasha with something that might have been respect mixed with his fear. You planned this, he said. All of it. The questions about our accounts, the way you've been acting so normal these past few weeks. You've been planning this the whole time. Yes. How long have you known? About Rebecca? Since the barbecue. About the money? About 2 weeks. And you never said anything. You just watched me dig myself deeper. I learned from the best, she said coolly. You taught me that lying and manipulation are perfectly acceptable when you want something badly enough. Eleanor made a sound of disgust. This is exactly why you never belonged in this family. Good people don't plot revenge like this. Good people don't steal from their spouses, Natasha replied. Good people don't have affairs while their wife is caring for their elderly parents. Good people don't toast their divorce at family gatherings while their wife is washing their dishes. She picked up her purse and headed for the door. Where are you going? Alexander called after her. To my lawyer's office. We have a lot to discuss. Natasha, wait. His voice was desperate now. Can't we at least try to work this out? Talk about this like adults? She turned back to him, and for a moment she saw a flash of the man she'd fallen in love with 8 years ago. The man who'd promised to love and cherish her, who'd vowed to be her partner in everything. Then she remembered the sound of his laughter at the barbecue, the way he'd called their marriage dead weight, the months of lies and deception and theft. We are talking like adults, Alexander. For the first time in our marriage, we're being completely honest with each other. But I love you, he said, and the worst part was that he might actually believe it. No, she said quietly. You love the idea of me. You love having someone to take care of your family and clean your house and make you feel like a good person. But you don't love me. If you loved me, you never could have done what you did. She opened the front door and stepped onto the porch, breathing in the fresh air like she'd been underwater. This isn't over, Robert called after her. We'll fight this. We won't let you destroy our son. Natasha turned back one last time, looking at the 4 people who'd made her life hell while she'd bent over backward trying to earn their approval. Your son destroyed himself, she said. I'm just making sure he faces the consequences. As she drove away, she could see them through the living room window, probably already plotting their next move. But for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of their disapproval or their anger. Because she finally understood something that had taken her 3 years to learn. Their opinion of her had never mattered. Their acceptance had never been worth the price she'd paid for it. And now, finally, it was time to collect what was actually owed to her. The morning after the confrontation, Natasha woke up in a hotel room for the first time in 8 years. She checked into the Hampton Inn on Route 9, not because she was afraid of Alexander, but because she needed space to think without his presence poisoning the air around her. Her phone had been buzzing all night with calls and texts from his family, but she turned it off after the first few messages made it clear they were alternating between threats and attempts at manipulation. She ordered room service coffee and spread her laptop and documents across the small table by the window. Outside, Millbrook was waking up people heading to work, kids waiting for school buses, the rhythm of a small town that had never quite felt like home. Sarah Bennett had texted her at 6 a.m., "Meet me at 9. We have work to do." By 8:30, Natasha was dressed and ready, wearing the navy blue suit she'd bought for job interviews 3 years ago but had never worn. It still fit perfectly, and looking at herself in the hotel mirror, she realized she looked like the woman she used to be. Professional. Confident. In control. Sarah's office was buzzing with activity when she arrived. 2 paralegals were organizing documents while Sarah paced behind her desk, already dressed like she was going to war. "How are you holding up?" Sarah asked. "Better than I expected." Natasha settled into the chair across from Sarah's desk. "What's our next move?" "Several things. First, I've been in touch with the DA's office about the fraud charges. They're very interested in your case apparently. Spousal financial fraud is becoming more common, and they want to make an example." A thrill of satisfaction ran through Natasha. What does that mean? It means Alexander could be looking at serious jail time if they decide to prosecute. 2 to 5 years, possibly more if we can prove this was part of a larger pattern of deception. And Rebecca? If she knew the money was stolen and given their relationship, she almost certainly did she could be charged as an accessory. Sarah's smile was sharp. "Turns out your husband's girlfriend works at the same bank where he opened that fake trust account. She helped him set it up." Natasha's jaw dropped. "She works at the bank?" "Millbrook Savings and Loan. She's a loan officer there." Which means she definitely knew he was moving money illegally, and she actively participated in the fraud. The pieces were falling into place now. Rebecca hadn't just been Alexander's affair partner, she'd been his accomplice. The woman he'd chosen to replace his wife was a criminal. "There's more," Sarah continued. "I had my investigator do some digging into Rebecca's background. Turns out this isn't her first rodeo. She was fired from her previous job at a bank in Springfield for irregularities in loan processing. No charges were filed, but the pattern is clear." Natasha felt like she was watching a movie about someone else's life. "He left me for a career criminal." "He left you for someone who was willing to help him steal from you," Sarah corrected. which tells you everything you need to know about his character. They spent the next hour going through strategy. The divorce proceedings would be complicated by the criminal investigation, but Sarah was confident they could use that to their advantage. Here's what's going to happen, Sarah explained. Alexander's going to want to settle quickly and quietly to avoid jail time. He's going to offer you a deal, probably a decent chunk of assets in exchange for you not cooperating with the prosecution. And you're going to tell him to go to hell. We're not making deals with thieves. Natasha's phone, which she'd finally turned back on, started buzzing with another call. Alexander's name appeared on the screen. "Speak of the devil," she said, showing Sarah the display. "Answer it. But put it on speaker, I want to hear what he has to say." Natasha accepted the call. "Hello, Alexander." "Jesus, Natasha, where are you? I've been calling all night." His voice was strained, exhausted. "We need to talk. We talked yesterday. I thought I was pretty clear. Not like that. Not with lawyers and... Look, can we meet somewhere? Just the two of us? Maybe we can work something out." Sarah was taking notes, her expression predatory. "Work something out?" Natasha repeated. "You mean like a plea bargain? I mean like two people who used to love each other trying to end this without destroying everything." His voice cracked slightly. "Please, Tash, for what we used to have." The use of her old nickname, one he hadn't used in months, was clearly calculated to tug at her heartstrings. It might have worked on the old Natasha. "What we used to have was based on lies," she said calmly. "I can't negotiate with someone I can't trust. I made mistakes. I know that. But does it have to end with me in prison? Does it have to end with both of us losing everything?" "I'm not losing anything, Alexander. I'm taking back what was stolen from me." There was a long pause. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted from pleading to something harder. "You know this is going to hurt you too, right? When all this comes out, when the whole town knows our business, you're going to be the woman who destroyed a local family. Is that really what you want?" Sarah scribbled a note and held it up. "Threat/intimidation, keep him talking." "Is that what you think?" Natasha asked. "That I should protect your reputation by staying quiet about your crimes? I think you should consider what's best for everyone involved." "I am. What's best for everyone is for you to face the consequences of your actions so you don't do this to the next woman." "The next woman?" His voice turned bitter. "There is no next woman. Rebecca. Rebecca wants nothing to do with me now that this has all come out." Natasha felt a stab of savage satisfaction. "Really? Your true love abandoned you the minute things got difficult? How shocking. Don't be cruel, Natasha. It doesn't suit you." "Cruel?" She laughed, and it was not a pleasant sound. "Alexander, you stole my money to wine and dine another woman while I was taking care of your family. You planned to divorce me without my knowledge while letting me believe we were working on our marriage. You humiliated me in front of people I considered family. And you think I'm being cruel? I never meant for it to happen like this. But it did happen like this. And now you get to live with the consequences." Another pause, longer this time. When Alexander spoke again, his mask had finally slipped completely. "Fine. You want to play hardball? Let's play hardball. I've got lawyers too, Natasha. And I've got family who will testify that you were impossible to live with, that you were controlling and manipulative, that you drove me away." Sarah was nodding approvingly and scribbling more notes. "Let them," Natasha said. "Let them testify under oath about how terrible I was while you were forging my signature and stealing my money. I'm sure that will go over well with a jury. You think you're so smart, don't you? You think you've got this all figured out? I think I've got documentation of your crimes and testimony from bank officials about your fraud. Everything else is just noise. We'll see about that." The line went dead. Sarah looked up from her notes, grinning like a shark. "Well, that was illuminating. He threatened me. He sure did. And he made it clear that his family is going to lie under oath to protect him, which could get them charged with perjury if they're not careful. What about Rebecca leaving him? Rats fleeing a sinking ship," Sarah said with satisfaction. "She probably figured out that being associated with him was going to destroy her career and possibly land her in jail. Smart move on her part, actually. So what happens now? Now we wait for them to make their next move while we keep building our case. The criminal investigation is proceeding on its own timeline, but for the divorce, we need to be ready for anything." Sarah pulled out a thick folder. "I need you to start thinking about what you want your life to look like after this is over. Where do you want to live? What do you want to do for work? What kind of settlement would make you whole?" For the first time in weeks, Natasha allowed herself to think beyond the immediate crisis. What did she want? I want to go back to Chicago, she said without hesitation. I want to work again, do something that matters. I want to rebuild the life I gave up. What about money? I want everything. The house, the business, the retirement accounts, all of it. He forfeited his right to marital assets when he started stealing from me. That's going to be a tough sell. Then we'd better make sure the criminal case is airtight. Sarah's grin widened. Now you're thinking like a winner. As Natasha left the law office, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: excitement about the future. For the first time since she'd moved to Millbrook, she was making plans based on what she wanted rather than what other people expected of her. Her phone rang as she reached her car. Patricia's name appeared on the screen. "How's my favorite revenge plotter?" Patricia asked by way of greeting. "Getting stronger every day," Natasha replied. "And I think I'm ready to talk about that job offer." "I was hoping you'd say that. When can you start?" Natasha looked back at the law office, then out at the small town that had never felt like home. "As soon as I finished destroying my lying, stealing, cheating husband," she said. Patricia's laughter was music to her ears. The process server found Alexander at the hardware store on a busy Saturday morning, right in front of half the town's weekend shoppers. Natasha wasn't there to witness it, but Beth called her within an hour, screaming into the phone about public humiliation and family embarrassment. "How could you do this to us?" Beth shrieked. "Everyone saw him get served. Everyone knows our business now." Natasha was in her hotel room, reviewing job descriptions Patricia had sent her, when the call came. She put Beth on speaker and continued scrolling through marketing positions in Chicago. "Actually, Beth, everyone knows Alexander's business now. This has nothing to do with you." "Of course it has to do with me. He's my brother. This family has been respected in this town for generations, and now everyone knows your brother is a thief and a cheat. That must be embarrassing for you. You vindictive bitch." Natasha hung up and blocked Beth's number. She'd blocked Eleanor and Robert the day before, after they'd left increasingly hostile voicemails threatening to make her pay for what she was doing to their son. Her phone rang again immediately. This time it was Sarah. "I take it you heard about this morning's excitement," Sarah said cheerfully. Beth called to share her feelings about it. "I'll bet she did. Well, here's something that might cheer you up. The DA's office just called. They're formally charging Alexander with forgery, fraud, and theft. Rebecca's being charged as an accessory." Natasha set down her laptop and focused entirely on the call. "When?" "Monday. They'll be arrested at work, which should be interesting given that Rebecca works at a bank." The irony was beautiful. Rebecca would be arrested for financial crimes at her place of employment in the financial services industry. Her career was over. What about the divorce proceedings? That's the other bit of good news. Alexander's lawyer called this morning wanting to negotiate a settlement. Apparently, his client is very motivated to resolve this quickly. What are they offering? 60% of marital assets and spousal support for 2 years. Natasha laughed out loud. "That's generous of him, considering he stole from me." "That's what I told his lawyer. I countered with 90% of assets, no spousal support, he can support himself, and full restitution for the stolen money." "What did they say?" "They're considering it. Which means they'll be back with a better offer by Monday." After the call ended, Natasha walked to the hotel window and looked out at Millbrook's Main Street. People were going about their Saturday errands, probably gossiping about the drama at the hardware store. In a town this small, news traveled fast. Part of her felt bad about the public spectacle. The old Natasha would have been mortified by the attention, would have wanted to handle everything quietly to avoid embarrassing Alexander's family. But the old Natasha had been played for a fool. The new Natasha understood that sometimes justice required public accountability. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk." Rebecca. Somehow she'd gotten Natasha's number. Against her better judgment, Natasha called the number back. "Thank you for calling me back." Rebecca's voice was shaky, nothing like the confident woman Natasha had seen at the barbecue. "I know you probably hate me, but I need you to know the truth." "The truth?" Natasha kept her voice flat. "Which version of the truth would that be?" "I never knew he was stealing from you. I swear to God, I had no idea the money was coming from your accounts. But you knew he was married." A long pause. "Yes." "And you knew he was lying to me about where he was and what he was doing." "Yes, but..." "And you worked at the bank where he set up the fake trust account." "That's why I'm calling." Rebecca's voice cracked. "I didn't know it was fake when I helped him set it up. He told me it was a legitimate trust for his family's estate planning. I never looked into the funding sources, I just processed the paperwork. Are you seriously calling me to claim you're another victim here? I'm calling because I'm scared, okay? Rebecca was crying now. I'm going to lose my job, maybe go to prison, and for what? For a man who dumped me the second this all came out. There it was. Alexander had abandoned Rebecca just like he tried to abandon Natasha. The difference was that Rebecca had been his willing accomplice. I can't help you, Natasha said. Even if I wanted to. You could tell the prosecutor that I was manipulated, that I didn't know what was really happening. But you did know. You knew he was married, you knew he was lying to his wife, and you chose to be part of it. The fact that you didn't ask questions about where the money was coming from doesn't make you innocent, it makes you willfully blind. Please, Rebecca whispered. I made mistakes, but I don't deserve to have my whole life destroyed. Neither did I, Natasha replied. But that didn't stop you from helping Alexander try to destroy it anyway. She hung up and immediately blocked Rebecca's number. An hour later, her phone rang again. This time it was Alexander himself. I know you probably don't want to talk to me, he said, his voice rough like he'd been crying. But I'm begging you. Please don't let this go to trial. Why not? Because it'll destroy everyone. Rebecca, my parents, Beth, they'll all get dragged through this. The whole town will know every detail of our private business. Should have thought of that before you committed fraud. I know I screwed up. I know I hurt you in ways I can't even apologize for. But can't we handle this privately? Can't we just end this without destroying everything? There was something pathetic in his voice that almost made her feel sorry for him. Almost. You want to handle this privately? She asked. The way you handled our marriage privately while you were stealing from me and sleeping with another woman? That's not fair. Fair? Natasha's voice rose. You want to talk about fair? Was it fair when you let your family toast our divorce while I was cleaning up after them? Was it fair when you stole my money to pay for dates with Rebecca? Was it fair when you planned to leave me with nothing while you started a new life? I never meant to leave you with nothing. Yes, you did. You moved our money where I couldn't access it. You were planning to divorce me without my knowledge so I couldn't protect myself financially. That's exactly what you meant to do. Alexander was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. The pleading was gone, replaced by something harder. You know what your problem is, Natasha? You never knew when to let things go. You always had to push, had to make everything into a big dramatic production. And there it was. The real Alexander, the one who'd been hiding behind fake remorse and manipulation. My problem is that I trusted you, she said coldly. But don't worry, I won't make that mistake again. Fine. You want to play this game? You want to drag this through the courts and destroy everyone involved? Go ahead. But remember, I know things about you too. I know how controlling you could be, how you tried to run everyone's lives, how you made my family miserable. Tell them, Natasha said. Tell everyone how terrible I was while you were committing felonies. I'm sure that will help your case. We'll see. Yes, we will. And Alexander? Next time you want to have an affair and steal from your wife, maybe don't do it with someone who works at a bank. That was just stupid. She hung up before he could respond. Within minutes, Sarah was calling her back. Please tell me you recorded that conversation, Sarah said. I didn't think to. That's okay. His lawyer just called again. They're accepting our terms. Natasha nearly dropped the phone. What? 90% of marital assets, full restitution, and Alexander waives all rights to spousal support. He also agrees not to contest any aspect of the divorce. Why would they agree to that? Because the alternative is a trial where all of this becomes public record. Alexander's reputation would be destroyed, his family's reputation would be destroyed, and he'd still probably go to jail. This way, he gets to avoid the worst of the publicity and maybe negotiate a plea deal on the criminal charges. Natasha sat down heavily on the hotel bed. After weeks of fighting, it was almost over. What happens next? We file the paperwork, the judge reviews the settlement, and you're officially divorced within 30 days. The criminal case proceeds separately, but that's not your problem anymore. What about the house? Yours. The business, the retirement accounts, everything all yours. You'll have enough money to start over anywhere you want. After the call ended, Natasha sat in silence for a long time. She'd won. Completely, decisively, overwhelmingly. Alexander would face criminal charges, his reputation was in ruins, and she was walking away with nearly everything they'd built together. So why didn't she feel more satisfied? Maybe because winning felt hollow when you realized how much you'd lost in the process. Not the money or the assets, those were just things. But the 8 years she'd spent trying to build a life with someone who'd never valued her, the career opportunities she'd missed, the relationships she'd neglected, the woman she'd allowed herself to become. Her phone rang. This time it was Patricia. "I heard through the grapevine that you might be free to start a new life soon," Patricia said. "How would you feel about coming back to Chicago?" "I'd feel like I was finally coming home." "Good. Because I just landed a client who needs someone with your exact skill set. International marketing, high-profile accounts, starting salary higher than what you were making when you left." Natasha closed her eyes and let herself imagine it. A real job again. Challenges that would stretch her mind. Colleagues who respected her abilities. A life that was entirely her own. "When do I start?" "Whenever you're ready. The client is flexible on timing." "I'll be ready soon," Natasha said. Very soon. That night she started making lists. Things to pack, things to sell, things to leave behind. By morning, she had a plan for her exit from Millbrook that was as thorough and strategic as her legal victory had been. Alexander thought he could destroy her quietly and move on to his new life. Instead, he'd given her exactly what she needed to rebuild herself stronger than before. Sometimes the best revenge wasn't just winning, it was winning so completely that your opponent finally understood what they'd lost. The criminal trial began on a cold Monday morning in November. Natasha sat in the gallery watching Alexander and Rebecca at the defendant's table, looking like strangers who'd accidentally ended up in the wrong courtroom. 3 months had passed since the divorce was finalized. 3 months since she'd walked away from Millbrook with more money than she'd ever had in her life and a job offer that had restored her faith in her own abilities. She didn't have to be there. The criminal case was the state's responsibility now, and her part was done. But she'd driven down from Chicago anyway, taking a personal day from her new position at Morrison & Associates, because she needed to see this through to the end. The prosecution calls Natasha Johnson to the stand. She'd been dreading this moment and looking forward to it in equal measure. As she walked to the witness stand, she could feel Alexander watching her, but she didn't look in his direction. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Jessica Chin, led her through the timeline of events. The barbecue discovery, the investigation into their finances, the pattern of forged signatures and stolen money. "Mrs. Johnson, can you describe your financial situation when you discovered these transactions?" "I had no access to our savings account, which had been emptied without my knowledge. Credit cards I didn't know existed had been opened in my name. Our retirement accounts had been depleted. If I hadn't discovered what was happening, I would have been left with nothing." "And you had no knowledge of these transactions?" "None. I trusted my husband to handle our finances honestly." Alexander's lawyer, a tired-looking man named Peterson, tried to paint her as a controlling wife who'd driven her husband to desperate measures. But the evidence was too clear, the documentation too thorough. "Isn't it true, Mrs. Johnson, that you were difficult to live with? That you made unreasonable demands on your husband's time and attention?" "I made the same demands any wife would make," Natasha replied calmly. "Honesty, fidelity, and basic respect. If those are unreasonable, then yes, I was unreasonable. But you acknowledge that your marriage had problems. Every marriage has problems. Most people solve them through communication or counseling, not theft and adultery." The defense had no answer for the forged signatures, no explanation for the fake trust account, no justification for the systematic draining of joint assets. By the end of the week, it was clear that the trial was just a formality. During a recess on Thursday, Natasha found herself alone in the courthouse hallway with Eleanor and Robert. Alexander's parents looked like they'd aged 10 years in the past few months. "I hope you're satisfied," Eleanor said bitterly. "You've destroyed our son's life." "Your son destroyed his own life," Natasha replied. "I just refused to let him destroy mine in the process. He made mistakes, but this." Robert gestured toward the courtroom. "This is vindictive. This is cruel. What would you have preferred? That I stay quiet while he stole from me? That I pretend the affair never happened? That I let him divorce me in secret so he could start fresh with Rebecca?" "You could have handled it privately," Eleanor insisted. "Like a decent person." Natasha stared at this woman she'd cared for through illness, whose house she'd cleaned, whose meals she'd cooked, whose approval she desperately sought. "A decent person doesn't steal from their spouse," she said quietly. "A decent person doesn't commit fraud. A decent person doesn't humiliate their wife at family gatherings while planning to abandon her." "Alexander is a good man who made poor choices," Robert said. "Alexander is a criminal who got caught. There's a difference." Eleanor's face twisted with rage. "You self-righteous little..." "Mom, stop." They all turned to see Alexander standing at the end of the hallway. He looked exhausted, defeated, like a man who'd finally run out of excuses. "Just stop," he said again, walking toward them. "She's right. About all of it." Eleanor looked stunned. "Alexander, you don't mean that." "I do mean it." He looked directly at Natasha for the first time in months. "I stole from you. I lied to you. I humiliated you. And when you fought back, I tried to make you the villain for refusing to be a victim." The admission hung in the air between them. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "And I threw it away for someone who dumped me the second things got difficult." Natasha felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, no leftover love. Just emptiness where her feelings for him used to be. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked. "Because you deserve to hear it. Because I should have said it months ago." He looked at his parents. "Because they need to hear it too." Robert made a sound of disgust. "This is what she's done to you. She's made you weak." "No, Dad. She made me honest. For the first time in our marriage, I'm being completely honest." Eleanor started to say something, but Alexander cut her off. "You want to know what really happened? I'll tell you what really happened. I met someone who made me feel important, who told me I deserved better than my boring wife and my small-town life. I convinced myself that Natasha was holding me back, that I'd be happier without her." He looked at Natasha again. "But the truth is, you were never holding me back. You were holding me up. You were making me better than I actually am. And I was too stupid and selfish to realize it." "Alexander," Eleanor said weakly. "Rebecca used me," he continued. "She helped me steal from my wife because she wanted the money. She told me she loved me because she wanted a comfortable life. And the second I got arrested, she vanished." The hallway was completely silent except for the distant sounds of the courthouse footsteps, muffled conversations, the ring of telephones. "I'm going to prison," Alexander said matter-of-factly. "Probably for 3 years, maybe more. My business is gone, my reputation is destroyed, and I've lost the only woman who ever really loved me." Natasha felt a stab of something that might have been pity, but it passed quickly. "I'm sorry that happened to you," she said. "But you made those choices, Alexander. Every single one of them." "I know." He nodded slowly. "I just wanted you to know that I know. I wanted you to know that you were right about everything." A bailiff appeared at the end of the hallway. "Court's reconvening in 5 minutes." As they walked back toward the courtroom, Eleanor grabbed Natasha's arm. "Please," she whispered. "Isn't there something you can do? Some way to help him?" Natasha gently removed Eleanor's hand from her arm. "I did everything I could to help him," she said. "For 8 years I did everything I could. Now it's time for him to help himself." The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Alexander was sentenced to 4 years in prison. Rebecca got 2 years and lost her banking license permanently. As the courtroom cleared out, Natasha gathered her things slowly. It was over. Really truly over. She was walking toward the exit when someone called her name. She turned to see a young woman approaching mid-20s, nervous, clearly wanting to talk. "Mrs. Johnson? I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm Amanda Walsh from the Tribune. I've been covering this case and I was wondering if you'd be willing to do an interview." "About what?" "About financial abuse in marriage. About how women can protect themselves. About fighting back when someone tries to steal your life." Natasha considered it. The old Natasha would have said no, would have wanted to put this whole experience behind her and never speak of it again. But the new Natasha understood something important. Her story could help other women. Her victory could show them that they didn't have to be victims. "Yes," she said. "I think I'd like that very much." 6 months later, the article would be picked up by national publications. A year later, Natasha would be speaking at conferences about financial abuse and women's empowerment. 2 years later, she'd start a non-profit organization helping other women navigate complex divorce situations. But that day, walking out of the courthouse in the crisp November air, all she felt was free. 2 years after the trial, Natasha was in her corner office at Morrison & Associates, reviewing a presentation for their biggest client, when her assistant knocked on the door. "There's a woman here to see you," Jennifer said. "She says it's about your ex-husband. Her name is Carol Peterson." The name sounded familiar, but Natasha couldn't place it immediately. "Did she say what this was about?" "She says she has information you need to know. She seems upset." Natasha glanced at her calendar. She had 20 minutes before her next meeting. Send her in. The woman who entered her office was in her 50s, well-dressed but clearly agitated. As soon as she sat down, recognition clicked into place. "You're the loan officer from Millbrook Community Bank?" Natasha said. I don't work there anymore." Carol's hands were shaking slightly. "Mrs. Johnson, I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you 2 years ago." Natasha set down her pen and gave Carol her full attention. "When you came to me that day asking about the transfers from your accounts, I helped you because what your husband did was wrong. But I didn't tell you everything." "What do you mean?" Carol took a deep breath. "Rebecca wasn't the only bank employee involved in your husband's scheme. There were others. And the money he stole? There was more of it than what came out in the trial." Natasha felt a chill run down her spine. "How much more?" "Nearly double. He had accounts at 3 different banks, all set up with forged documents. The FBI is just now uncovering the full extent of it." "The FBI?" "Rebecca's case led them to investigate a larger network of bank fraud. Turns out she was running a scheme that went way beyond helping one cheating husband. She was facilitating financial fraud for multiple clients, taking a cut of everything that was stolen." Natasha leaned back in her chair, trying to process this information. "Are you saying Alexander was part of something bigger?" "I'm saying Rebecca recruited him. She targeted married men with assets and helped them hide money from their wives in exchange for a percentage. Your husband wasn't her first victim, he was one of at least 12 men she was working with." The room seemed to spin slightly. 12? 12 that they've found so far. The FBI thinks there might be more. Carol leaned forward. "Mrs. Johnson, your husband didn't just have an affair that led to financial fraud. He was deliberately targeted by a professional criminal who saw him as an easy mark." "But he still chose to do it," Natasha said, though her voice sounded distant to her own ears. "Of course he did. I'm not trying to excuse his actions. But I thought you should know that Rebecca wasn't some lovesick woman who got caught up in an affair. She was a predator who saw your marriage and your assets as an opportunity." Carol reached into her purse and pulled out a thick envelope. "The FBI asked me to give you this. It's a full accounting of what was stolen from you, including money you never knew about." Natasha opened the envelope with trembling hands. Bank statements, account records, transfer documents, all showing systematic theft that went far beyond what had been discovered during her divorce. "There's more," Carol said quietly. "Rebecca kept detailed records of all her clients. The FBI found files on all the men she was working with, including psychological profiles. She studied them, figured out their weaknesses, and exploited them." "What kind of profiles?" "Men who felt unappreciated in their marriages. Men who had access to significant assets. Men who were emotionally vulnerable to flattery and attention from an attractive woman." Carol paused. "She had a 40-page file on your husband." Natasha stared at the documents in her hands. Part of her felt vindicated. Alexander had been manipulated by a professional criminal. But another part of her felt something she didn't expect. A strange kind of relief. "The reason I'm telling you this," Carol continued, "is because the FBI is reopening the case. Rebecca's going to be charged with dozens of additional counts of fraud. And they're going to need your testimony again." "What about Alexander?" "He's already in prison, so his situation doesn't change much. But there might be additional restitution available to you. A lot more money than what you recovered in the divorce." After Carol left, Natasha sat alone in her office, staring at the documents spread across her desk. Her phone buzzed with messages, her calendar showed back-to-back meetings, but she couldn't focus on any of it. She thought about the past 2 years, the nonprofit she'd started, the speaking engagements, the interviews where she told her story of fighting back against financial abuse. She'd become something of a poster child for women who refused to be victims. But now she was learning that she'd been victimized by someone much more sophisticated than she'd realized. Rebecca hadn't been just a bank employee who'd helped her boyfriend commit fraud, she'd been a career criminal who'd targeted dozens of families. Her phone rang. The display showed a number she didn't recognize. Natasha Johnson. "Ms. Johnson, this is Special Agent Sarah Martinez with the FBI. I believe Carol Peterson just paid you a visit." "Yes, she did. I know this is a lot to process, but we'd like to meet with you as soon as possible. This case has become much larger than we initially realized, and your experience with Rebecca Connors could be crucial to our investigation." "Rebecca Connors? That's not her real name." "No. Her real name is Rebecca Connors. Rebecca Walsh was an identity she assumed when she moved to Millbrook. She's been running variations of this scam for nearly a decade." Natasha felt dizzy. "How many people has she hurt?" "We're still counting. But Ms. Johnson, there's something else you need to know. Something that might be difficult to hear." "What?" We don't think your husband was her primary target. We think you were. The words didn't make sense at first. What do you mean? Rebecca studied your background before she moved to Millbrook. She knew about your career in marketing, your salary history, your family's financial situation. She knew exactly how much money you'd given up when you moved there with your husband. But she targeted Alexander, not me. She targeted Alexander to get to you. The easiest way to access your assets was through your marriage. She seduced your husband, convinced him to move money around, and planned to disappear with everything once the divorce was final. Natasha sank into her chair. She was planning to take everything? Everything. Your husband thought he was going to start a new life with her, but she was planning to vanish with all the money and leave him holding the bag for the fraud charges. The full scope of Rebecca's plan was staggering. She targeted Natasha specifically, studied her vulnerabilities, and manipulated Alexander into destroying his own marriage while stealing his wife's assets. The only reason the plan failed, Agent Martinez continued, was because you fought back faster and smarter than she expected. Most of her victims don't discover the theft until it's too late to recover anything. That evening, Natasha sat in her Chicago apartment, looking out at the city lights and trying to make sense of everything she'd learned. Her phone had been ringing all day, reporters who'd somehow gotten wind of the expanded investigation, lawyers involved in the new cases, advocates who wanted her perspective on the larger implications. But the call she was waiting for came just after 9 p.m. Natasha? It's Patricia. I heard about what happened today. Are you okay? I don't know, Natasha said honestly. I thought I understood what happened to me. I thought I had the whole story. Does this change anything for you? Natasha considered the question. Did it change anything to know that Alexander had been systematically manipulated by a professional criminal? Did it change anything to know that she'd been the real target all along? It doesn't change what he did, she said finally. He still chose to lie to me, steal from me, humiliate me. Whatever Rebecca's motivations were, he still made those choices. But it does explain some things. Like why he seemed so out of character during those last months. Like why his family turned against me so suddenly. She probably manipulated them too. Are you going to cooperate with the FBI? Yes. If my story can help other women, if it can put Rebecca away for good, then yes. What about Alexander? Natasha was quiet for a long moment. I don't know. I haven't talked to him since the trial. But maybe I need to hear his side of this. The real side, now that we know what actually happened. The next morning she called Sarah Bennett. I want to visit Alexander in prison, she said. Are you sure that's a good idea? I need to know if he has information that could help the FBI case. And I need to know if the man I married is still in there somewhere, or if Rebecca destroyed him completely. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Natasha, you don't owe him anything. Not even answers. I'm not doing it for him. I'm doing it for me. I need to close this chapter completely before I can move on. It would take 3 weeks to arrange the visit. 3 weeks during which the FBI investigation exploded across national news, with Rebecca being called one of the most sophisticated financial predators in recent history. 3 weeks during which Natasha had to decide what she would say to the man who'd been her husband, her betrayer, and now, apparently, a fellow victim of the same criminal. The truth, it turned out, was more complicated than anyone had imagined. The drive to Millbrook Correctional Facility took 2 hours, giving Natasha plenty of time to question her decision. She'd been asking herself the same questions for weeks. Why was she doing this? What did she hope to accomplish? What could Alexander possibly tell her that would matter now? The prison was exactly what she'd expected: gray concrete, razor wire, the kind of place that seemed designed to crush hope. As she went through security, she wondered if this was how Rebecca had felt when she'd visited her other marks, sizing up their desperation for someone she could exploit. Alexander looked older than his 36 years. Prison had carved lines around his eyes and added gray to his hair that hadn't been there 2 years ago. When he saw her through the glass partition, his expression cycled through surprise, hope, and finally resignation. I didn't think you'd ever want to see me again, he said, picking up the phone on his side of the glass. I didn't think I would either. Natasha settled into the uncomfortable plastic chair. But things have changed. I heard about the FBI investigation. About Rebecca's other activities. Did you know? About the other men, the other families she was targeting? Alexander shook his head. I had no idea. I thought. He laughed bitterly. I thought I was special. I thought she chose me because she loved me. Tell me how it started. For the next hour, Alexander laid out the whole story. How Rebecca had seemed to run into him everywhere: the coffee shop, the grocery store, the gas station. How she'd struck up conversations about his work, his family, his frustrations with small-town life. She made me feel important, he said. Like I was this successful businessman who deserved better than what I had. She'd listen to me complain about the hardware store, about my parents, about... He stopped. About me? Yeah. About you. He met her eyes through the glass. She'd ask leading questions, get me to talk about our problems. Then she'd tell me I deserved someone who understood me better. What problems, Alexander? Because I've been thinking about it for 2 years, and I still don't understand what I did wrong. You didn't do anything wrong. His voice was flat, tired. That's what I finally figured out in here. You were perfect. You gave up everything for me and my family, and I convinced myself that was somehow a burden instead of a gift. But why? What made you so willing to believe her? Alexander was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. When he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. Because I felt like a failure. The hardware store was struggling, my parents were always criticizing me, and here you were, this smart, successful woman who'd given up her career to move to our crappy little town. I felt guilty about it every day. So you decided to punish me for it? I decided to find someone who would tell me it wasn't my fault. Rebecca made me feel like I was the victim, like you were the problem. He looked up at her. She was very good at it. The money, Alexander. Tell me about the money. She said we needed to secure our future together. She convinced me that you would try to take everything in a divorce, that I needed to protect myself financially. She walked me through setting up the accounts, showed me how to move money without triggering alerts. And you never questioned it? I was in love with her. Or I thought I was. She made me feel like we were partners, like we were building something together. His voice cracked. I was so stupid, Natasha. So incredibly stupid. What about your family? How did they get involved? Rebecca was smart about that too. She'd show up at family gatherings, be charming and sweet to everyone. Then she'd make little comments about how you seemed unhappy, how you probably missed your old life in the city. She planted seeds. Natasha thought about those last months, how Alexander's family had grown increasingly cold toward her. She'd blamed herself, wondered what she'd done wrong. She turned them against me. She made them feel like they were protecting me from you. Like you were the one causing problems in our marriage. Alexander's hands were shaking now. The night of that barbecue when I made that toast, that was her idea. She said I needed to be public about wanting out so you couldn't claim I'd misled you about my intentions. The memory of that night still stung, but now it made a terrible kind of sense. Rebecca had orchestrated the entire humiliation, probably planning to use Alexander's public rejection of his wife as evidence that the marriage was over when she disappeared with the money. When did you realize what she really was? The day I got arrested. She was supposed to meet me that night and she just vanished. Changed her phone number, cleared out her apartment, gone. I tried to find her for weeks before I finally accepted that she'd played me. Do you know how many other men she was doing this to? The FBI told me about some of them when they interviewed me last month. Guys just like me, married, with assets, feeling unappreciated. She had a type. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of Rebecca's manipulation settling between them. Natasha, Alexander said finally, I need you to know something. Even if Rebecca was pulling the strings, even if I was being manipulated, what I did to you was unforgivable. The lying, the stealing, the way I treated you at the end. That was all me. I know. I destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me because I was too weak and too stupid to see what I had. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve forgiveness. But I needed you to know that I know what I lost. Natasha looked at this man she'd once loved, now broken by his own choices and someone else's manipulation. She felt many things: pity, sadness, even a strange kind of relief. But she didn't feel anger anymore. The FBI wants me to testify in Rebecca's new trial, she said. You should. She needs to pay for what she did to all those families. They think my testimony could help put her away for 20 years or more. Good. Alexander's voice was fierce. She destroyed my life, but more importantly, she almost destroyed yours. If I can help stop her from doing this to anyone else, I will. There's something else. The restitution from the new charges, it's going to be substantial. More money than I lost in our divorce. Alexander nodded slowly. What will you do with it? I'm thinking about expanding my nonprofit. Helping more women who've been through what I went through. That's good. That's really good, Natasha. You always were better at helping people than I was. The visiting time was almost over. Natasha had gotten the answers she'd come for, but she found herself reluctant to leave. Not because she wanted to reconcile that ship had sailed and sunk, but because she needed to say something that had been weighing on her mind. "Alexander, I want you to know that I don't hate you anymore." His eyes filled with tears. "You should. You have every right to hate me. Hating you was destroying me too. I needed to let it go so I could move on completely." "Are you moving on?" Natasha thought about her life in Chicago, the challenging work, the growing nonprofit, the man she'd started dating who treated her like an equal partner rather than a possession. "Yes. I'm building something new, something that's entirely mine. Something that makes me happy." "I'm glad. You deserve happiness." As she stood to leave, Alexander pressed his hand against the glass. "Natasha? For what it's worth, I am sorry. For all of it." "I know you are," she said. "And for what it's worth, I hope you find a way to rebuild too. After you serve your time, after this is all over. I hope you find a way to become the man you were supposed to be." The drive back to Chicago gave her time to process the conversation. Learning about Rebecca's true nature didn't change what Alexander had done, but it did give her a different perspective on how it had happened. He'd been vulnerable, insecure, and stupid, but he'd also been systematically manipulated by a professional predator. It didn't excuse his choices, but it helped her understand them. 6 months later, Natasha stood in a federal courtroom in Springfield, raising her right hand to be sworn in as a witness in United States versus Rebecca Connors. The defendant looked nothing like the confident woman who'd sat beside Alexander at that barbecue 3 years ago. Prison had been hard on Rebecca too. Natasha's testimony was clear, detailed, and devastating. She walked the jury through the timeline of her marriage's destruction, the discovery of the financial fraud, and the systematic way Rebecca had manipulated not just Alexander but his entire family. When Rebecca's lawyer tried to suggest that Natasha was an angry ex-wife seeking revenge, she looked directly at the jury. "I'm not here for revenge," she said. "I'm here for justice. Not just for me but for all the other women whose lives this defendant tried to destroy." The trial lasted 3 weeks. Rebecca was convicted on 47 counts of fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. The judge sentenced her to 25 years in federal prison. As Natasha left the courthouse, she felt something she hadn't experienced since that night at the barbecue 3 years ago: complete closure. Her phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "Dinner tonight to celebrate?" She typed back, "Absolutely. I have news." "Good news?" "The best. James proposed last night." James Morrison, the son of her boss and a successful architect in his own right, was everything Alexander hadn't been: honest, supportive, genuinely interested in her success. He proposed on the rooftop of their apartment building, with the Chicago skyline sparkling around them. "I knew it," Patricia replied. "When's the wedding?" "We're thinking next summer. Small ceremony, just close friends and family." "I'm so happy for you. You deserve this." Natasha looked back at the courthouse one more time, then walked toward her car and her new life. She'd lost 8 years to a man who'd never deserved her, but she'd gained something invaluable in return: the knowledge of her own strength. 3 years ago, she'd been a woman who defined herself through other people's expectations. Today, she was a woman who knew exactly who she was and what she was worth. Alexander had tried to destroy her and had destroyed himself instead. Rebecca had tried to steal her life and had ended up losing her own freedom. But Natasha had won everything that mattered: her self-respect, her financial independence, her career, and now, a love built on equality and honesty rather than manipulation and control. As she drove back to Chicago, she thought about the woman she'd been at that barbecue, listening to her husband toast their divorce while she washed his family's dishes. That woman had felt broken, humiliated, powerless. This woman felt invincible. Sometimes the best revenge wasn't about destroying your enemies, it was about building a life so good that their betrayal became the best thing that ever happened to you. And Natasha Johnson had built a life that was better than anything she could have imagined when she was trying so hard to earn the approval of people who'd never deserved her in the first place. She was free. She was successful. She was loved. She had won.